Adrien Mercer, a master home builder, celebrates 15 years of success, unaware his wife, Vanessa, and her lover Theo plot to sell his company. Shocked by their affair and financial betrayal, Adrien uncovers a deeper conspiracy involving Vanessa's mother, Patricia. Fueled by rage, he orchestrates a meticulous revenge, exposing their fraud at a family barbecue and dismantling Theo's empire through legal and financial maneuvers. As his daughter Mia grapples with the fallout, Adrien questions his transformation from builder to destroyer. Will he reclaim his integrity or let vengeance define him? The stakes are high and the endgame is near. Love gripping tales like Adrien's? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heart-pounding stories that spark curiosity and emotion. Your support fuels our storytelling, bringing diverse perspectives to life. Like, share, and comment with your thoughts. We'd love to hear your stories too. Join us for more unforgettable narratives. Adrien's grip tightened on the cold beer bottle, his fingers curling around it like a lifeline. A sharp burst of laughter from across the lawn broke through his thoughts, drawing his attention. His mother-in-law's voice, shrill and biting, floated over the gathering, carrying her words with cruel clarity. He's a terrible father, just like he was a terrible husband. The family barbecue, which should have been a celebration, rippled with the tension of her cruel remark. The others around the table chuckled, their laughter a thin veil for the uncomfortable truth. But Adrien's gaze was fixed on one small figure in the crowd. Mia stood, her teenage bravado on full display, hands on her hips, her face set in a mask of determination. Without hesitation, she climbed onto a chair, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the group like a blade. "Grandma," she declared, her words unwavering, "I have something Mom doesn't want you to know." The laughter died instantly. Vanessa's face, usually composed and controlled, drained of color. Adrien saw the panic flicker in her eyes just before she collapsed, crumpling to the ground as if the weight of the world had suddenly become too much to bear. Chapter 1, Foundations. Adrien Mercer had always built things. It was a part of him, ingrained deep in his bones, the rhythmic satisfaction of shaping something from nothing, watching raw materials transform under his skilled hands. From fixing bicycles in his father's garage as a boy to becoming the most sought-after custom home builder in Lakewood, Adrien had earned his reputation. It wasn't just about the financial rewards, though those had certainly come with time. No, what he valued above all else was respect, and that he had in abundance. Today marked 15 years since he'd founded Mercer Custom Homes, and the celebration was a fitting one. A lakeside property, stunning and pristine, the culmination of years of hard work. His crew and their families mingled, enjoying the warm summer evening. Adrien stood off to the side, nursing a beer, watching as Vanessa held court with a group of potential clients. She had always been the social one, the face of the business, while he worked tirelessly behind the scenes. "Come on, man, you could at least pretend to mingle," Scott, his brother-in-law, chided, handing him a fresh beer. "They seem to be managing fine without me," Adrien replied, nodding toward Vanessa, who was effortlessly weaving a tapestry of charm. At 42, she was still a striking figure, tall, graceful, with auburn hair that shimmered in the glow of the setting sun. "Besides," he added with a half-smile, "I build the houses, she sells the dream." Scott's smile was thin, the corners of his mouth lifting but not reaching his eyes. It was a look that Adrien had learned to recognize, the quiet disapproval that Scott had always harbored for Vanessa. But for the most part, he kept it to himself these days. "Dad?" Mia's voice cut through the quiet between them. Adrien turned to see his daughter bounding up to him, her youthful energy never seeming to run out. She was 16 now, nearly as tall as he was, her presence still as vibrant as when she was a child. "Mom says we're cutting the cake in 10 minutes. She wanted me to make sure you're ready for your speech." Adrien frowned, a bewildered laugh escaping him. "Speech? What speech?" Mia rolled her eyes in that way only a teenager could. "It's your company anniversary, Dad. Of course you're giving a speech." Before he could protest, his phone buzzed, the notification lighting up the screen. It was Dean Lowry, his project manager. "Need to talk. It's important. Meet me in the boathouse." Adrien's stomach tightened. "Everything okay?" Mia asked, noticing the sudden shift in his expression. "Yeah," he replied, forcing a calm smile. "Just business. Tell your mom I'll be there in 5. He ruffled her hair, an instinctive gesture that had long since lost its playfulness, though she still allowed it. Then he walked off, his thoughts clouding as he moved toward the boathouse, the hum of the party fading behind him. The boathouse was dim when he entered, the evening light barely filtering through the small, high windows. "Dean," Adrien called out, reaching for the light switch. The bulbs flickered to life, revealing not Dean, but Theo Reynolds, standing near Adrien's own boat. The man's easy posture, leaning against the vessel, made him seem oddly comfortable in a place that was clearly off-limits. "Adrien," Theo greeted, his voice casual but laced with something Adrien couldn't quite place. "Sorry for the cloak and his shagger. I borrowed Dean's phone." Adrien's body stiffened involuntarily. "What's this about, Theo?" he asked, his tone controlled but edged with irritation. "I've got guests waiting." "I'll be brief," Theo said, pushing off from the boat with a smooth grace, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor of the dock. "I'm offering to buy you out. $20 million. Your brand stays intact. You get a 5-year contract as lead builder, but Reynolds Development takes ownership." Adrien stared at him, stunned into silence. "My company is not for sale." Theo's smile didn't waver, but there was a gleam of something darker in his eyes. "Vanessa seems to think otherwise. We've been discussing terms for months." The world tilted beneath Adrien's feet. "Vanessa has no authority to sell my company," he managed, his voice thick with disbelief. Theo raised an eyebrow, pulling out his phone with a slow, deliberate motion. "As your CFO and co-owner, I believe she does." He swiped the screen, turning the phone toward Adrien. "These are the preliminary papers she's already reviewed. All I need is your signature to make it official." Adrien's breath caught in his throat. His world, his life's work, his marriage, everything he'd built, was unraveling before his eyes. "Get out," he said, his voice low, trembling with restrained fury. "We'll discuss this another time." Theo slipped the phone back into his pocket, nodding. "Fair enough, but the offer expires at the end of the month. Vanessa is quite eager to move forward." He paused at the door, his parting words floating in the air like a bitter aftertaste. "Oh, and congratulations on 15 years. Quite an achievement." Adrien stood alone in the boathouse, the muffled sounds of the party continuing in the distance. His world, the foundation of everything he had believed in, had just cracked wide open. Returning to the party felt like walking through a dream he couldn't quite shake. Vanessa was scanning the crowd for him, her face creased with irritation. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Everyone's waiting." She reached up to adjust his collar, an unnecessary touch that once had felt tender, but now only served to annoy him. "Why didn't you tell me Theo Reynolds wants to buy the company?" Adrien's voice was calm, but the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable. Vanessa froze, her hand stilling on his collar. Her eyes darted toward the crowd as though seeking refuge in their collective gaze. "Theo approached you tonight?" he pressed, his tone still low but firm. "With paperwork you have already reviewed?" She recovered swiftly, her practiced smile sliding back into place. "We can discuss this later. Right now, we have guests." "No," Adrien said, his voice steel. "We discuss this now." How long had she been talking to Reynolds behind his back? How long had their life together been a lie? Vanessa hissed under her breath. "Not here." Adrien's gaze flicked over her shoulder. Theo had returned and was standing at the edge of the gathering, watching them with a gaze so full of knowing that it made Adrien's skin crawl. Their eyes met, and Theo raised his glass, offering a small, mocking toast. Adrien's chest tightened as he swallowed the bitter truth. He was standing on the edge of a precipice, and Vanessa was pushing him over. "Fine," he muttered, turning away, "but this conversation is far from over." As they made their way to the center of the gathering, a large cake gleaming with the Mercer Custom Homes logo waited for them. Cameras flashed, and the crowd cheered, but Adrien's smile was a mask, a hollow thing that didn't reach his eyes. His company, his legacy, his marriage, all of it was slipping away, and nothing would ever be the same again. The foundation of his life, he realized, was built on sand, and it was already starting to crumble. Chapter 2, Cracks. The drive home was quiet, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Mia sat in the back seat, headphones in, her world 1,000 miles away from the storm brewing between her parents. Adrien's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched in a silent battle. Vanessa sat beside him, her gaze lost in the passing streetlights, her profile a pale shadow in the dim light. Once home, Mia disappeared upstairs with a brief good night, leaving her parents alone in the kitchen of the house Adrien had built with his own hands. It was his masterpiece, the home he had poured his soul into, with open spaces and walls of windows overlooking the lake, a testament to everything he had worked for. Explain, Adrien's fingers lingered over the keys, the cool click of the keyboard, a cruel contrast to the heat of betrayal coursing through him. How had it come to this? How had the woman he had built a life with, the woman who had shared his dreams, become a stranger in the span of a few months? He shut his eyes for a moment, remembering the hum of sawdust in his workshop, the scent of fresh wood and varnish, the only comfort left to him now. That place, that workshop, was where he'd spent the night after the argument with Vanessa. It was the one space in the world that still felt like his own, untainted by her lies. The world outside, though, had shifted. His home, his company, his very existence had been cracked wide open, and now he was left sifting through the rubble of his trust. Don't pretend this is about family, Adrien had said earlier. His voice edged fine with hurt. He had wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, some temporary lapse in judgment. But he knew better now. He had seen the evidence of her deceit. The cold, calculated way she had distanced herself from him, the way she had looked at Theo Reynolds as if no one could see. Her answer had come sharp, defensive. It's your ego, Adrien. You're so obsessed with being Adrien Mercer, the builder, that you can't see what's best for this family. No, it wasn't about his ego. It was about betrayal, about Vanessa, the woman who had once been his anchor, turning into someone he didn't even recognize. But the anger, the rage that had sparked inside him had quickly turned to a hollow emptiness. What had they even built, if not this house of lies? That morning, as they sat at the breakfast table, Vanessa's words, smooth, rehearsed, had done little to calm him. Our company, she had corrected him, her tone patronizing. You get monthly reports, Adrien. Nothing's changed. But Adrien knew better. He wasn't asking to see reports. He was asking to see the truth. The one thing that had been obscured by months of false promises. I want to see the financials. Every account, every transaction from the past year. Vanessa's brow had furrowed in surprise, though her expression was carefully crafted. Why? Because, he said, leaning forward, his voice steady but hard as steel, if we're discussing selling my company, I need to know exactly what state it's in. Humor me, he'd added when she tried to brush him off. His words were final. This wasn't a request. Not anymore. As if sensing the shift in the air, Mia entered the kitchen, her eyes immediately darting between them. Her bright smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, as she poured herself juice. Everything okay? Fine, honey, Vanessa had answered too quickly. Dad and I are just discussing business. Mia had raised an eyebrow, the faintest edge of skepticism creeping into her voice. Business doesn't know weekends. Adrien forced a smile, grateful for the moment of normalcy. Hey, I thought we could work on your car today. That timing belt isn't going to replace itself. The joke, feeble as it was, made her smile, her face lighting up the way it always did when he made the effort. Really? She asked, surprise coloring her tone. I thought you'd be busy with work stuff after last night. Never too busy for you, kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair, earning a dramatic groan from her. Her laughter filled the room, a sound that had once been so comforting, but now felt like a reminder of everything slipping through his fingers. As they worked together under the hood of Mia's Honda, Adrien's gaze lingered on his daughter. Her face, her hands, so much like Vanessa's. But in that moment, the weight of what was coming, and had already begun to unravel, settled heavily in his chest. She was growing up, becoming someone he didn't fully understand. Just like Vanessa had, she'd begun spending time with new friends, friends he and Vanessa hadn't met. How's school? Adrien asked, his voice casual as he passed her a wrench. That project for Mr. Landry going okay? Mia's response was a little too quick, her eyes glued to the bolt she was tightening. It's fine, we're working on it. We? Adrien asked, feigning ignorance. Yeah, my partner Tyler, she answered, avoiding his eyes, her focus sharpening on the car. He nodded, but the unease in his gut didn't subside. You know, you can talk to me about anything, right? No matter what. She paused, looking up at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Yeah, Dad, I know. Before he could say more, the sound of gravel crunching under tires reached them, pulling his attention away. A sleek black SUV rolled into their driveway, and Theo Reynolds stepped out, looking every bit the part of a man who had everything under control. Casual yet expensive in his designer jeans and blazer. What's he doing here? Mia asked, her voice low. Adrien wiped his hands on a rag, his suspicions sharp. Good question. Vanessa appeared at the door, her smile too polished, her composure too perfect for a Saturday morning at home. She greeted Theo with a smile and a hug that lingered just a moment too long, and Adrien felt something cold twist in his stomach. I'll finish up here, Mia said quietly, noticing the shift in Adrien's mood. Adrien nodded, his eyes still on the pair as he approached them. Theo, this is unexpected. Sorry to drop by unannounced, Theo said smoothly, his voice oozing charm. Vanessa mentioned you had questions about the offer, and I was in the neighborhood. Adrien's gaze flicked to Vanessa, whose smile had faltered ever so slightly. Did she? Adrien asked, his voice hardening. Well, come in then. Let's talk, Adrien said, forcing the words out. The three of them retreated to his home office, and Theo began outlining his vision. It sounded perfect on paper, reliable, profitable, and slick. But to Adrien, it felt like a betrayal of everything he had built. He knew what Theo was offering, a world of quick profits, flashy designs, and mass-produced homes that would strip his work of its soul. Your craftsmanship combined with our resources, Theo said. We could double your output in the first year. Adrien's voice cut through the room like a knife. At what cost to quality? Theo leaned forward, his smile widening. I understand your concerns, but times change, Adrien. Clients want homes faster with all the modern amenities. They care more about smart home features than hand-carved banisters. Adrien's eyes narrowed. Some clients may be, he said slowly, but not mine. Vanessa chimed in, her voice unwavering. They could be, Adrien. That's what Theo's been showing me. There's a whole market we're not reaching. The hairs on the back of Adrien's neck stood up. He studied them both closely for the first time. The way they angled toward each other, the way their body language spoke louder than their words. I'll need time to consider everything, Adrien said finally, his tone final. And I want my lawyer to review any paperwork. Theo nodded, standing as he extended his hand. Of course. Take the weekend. We can meet at my office Monday morning. After Theo left, Adrien stood frozen in the kitchen. He turned to face Vanessa, his voice low but unmistakable. How long? She didn't turn to face him, her back to him as she washed a coffee mug. How long? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, but carrying the weight of years of deception. How long have you been sleeping with him? The mug slipped from her hands and shattered in the sink, the sound so sharp it pierced the thick silence between them. Vanessa slowly turned to face him, her face an unreadable mask, but her eyes betrayed her. That's absurd, she said, her voice shaky. Is it? Adrien's voice was firm, colder now. The secret meetings? The way you look at each other? Do you think I'm blind? You're being paranoid, she said, her voice wavering, but Adrien could see the cracks in her mask. Theo is a business associate, nothing more. Adrien's eyes locked on her. You know what's strange? I built this house to be our forever home. I know every nail, every board, but standing here now, I've never felt more as like a stranger in my own life. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Adrien, wait, it's not what you think. He looked back at her, waiting. We're just friends, she said quickly, her words almost pleading. He understands the pressure I'm under, the sacrifices I've made for this family, for this business. Sacrifices? Adrien repeated, incredulous. What sacrifices, Vanessa? The vacations, the car, the country club membership. Tell me, what part of our life together has been such a burden? Before she could answer, they heard footsteps in the hallway. The front door had opened, and Mia's voice was approaching. Vanessa quickly composed herself, wiping a tear away that Adrien was sure wasn't real. Well, we'll discuss this later, she said quietly. Yes, Adrien agreed, his voice bitter. We will. Later that night, after Vanessa pretended to sleep, Adrien slipped into the home office, his mind racing with questions. As CFO, Vanessa had access to everything, but Adrien still had administrator rights. He logged into the company's financial system and began his search. Every transaction, every account, every secret. Adrien's eyes locked onto the financial documents spread out before him, their cold black and white figures mocking him. The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, casting a golden glow that only made the scene feel more surreal. A cup of coffee, forgotten, sat cooling beside him, its steam long dissipated, just like the warmth that had once existed in his home. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not after what he had discovered. Each new piece of the puzzle he'd unearthed about Vanessa's betrayal seemed to add weight to the crushing reality sinking deeper into his bones. 3 hours ago, he'd stumbled upon a string of consulting payments, small enough to avoid suspicion on their own, but damning when amassed. Over $200,000 to a company called Westlake Strategies. It wasn't a name he recognized, nor had he approved any contracts related to it. A quick search revealed an incorporation date from 18 months prior, an address that led to a virtual office, and a registered agent who meant nothing to him. But the principal listed in the company records, Theo Reynolds, struck Adrien like a blow to the gut. Vanessa hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been funneling company funds to her lover, systematically weakening the business to make it ripe for a takeover. It was all so much worse than he had ever imagined. His trust had been shattered, not just in the woman who had once been his wife, but in everything he'd built, his company, his future, his life. The betrayal was complete, personal and professional, and the sting of it was unbearable. As he leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery pressing on him, a sharp clarity took hold of him. The man who had once believed in second chance, who had built his empire with his own hands, was gone. In his place stood something else, someone who understood that sometimes, to move forward, you had to raze everything to the ground and start anew. And this time, he wouldn't be building. He would be destroying. When Vanessa entered the kitchen, dressed in her silk robe, the sight of her only deepened his resolve. "You're up early," she said, her voice carrying the tone of someone still unaware of the storm that had already broken in his mind. She moved toward the coffee maker, her back to him, the sound of porcelain mugs clinking a dull rhythm in the silence. "Couldn't sleep, I was working," Adrien replied flatly, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held when he spoke to her. "Looking over some interesting financial records." Vanessa froze, her hand hovering over a mug almost imperceptibly before it set down. Her spine stiffened. She could feel it. He knew something. "What's this about?" she asked carefully, trying to keep her composure. "Westlake Strategies," Adrien said, his voice colder than the granite countertop beneath his fingertips. "Ring any bells?" For a moment, Vanessa said nothing, her face an unreadable mask. Then she slowly set the mug down and turned to face him. "You've been going through company records without telling me?" Her voice was tight, defensive, her words laced with venom. "Ironic that you're concerned about people doing things behind your back." Adrien's eyes narrowed, a bitter edge creeping into his tone. "What is Westlake Strategies, Vanessa, besides a shell company for your lover?" Vanessa flinched, the words like a slap, but she quickly masked her reaction. "It's not what you think," she muttered, though there was no conviction in her voice. "No," Adrien snapped, his anger rising. "It's exactly what I think. 200,000 of company money to a fake consulting firm. And you've been positioning us for a takeover by Theo Reynolds." His voice dropped to a chilling calm. "What you've been doing isn't just business strategy, it's fraud." The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in around them, the air thickening with the unspoken truth. Vanessa's deflection cracked, and her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, softened with a mix of panic and guilt. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she stammered, her voice breaking as the cracks in her composure spread. "The company is stagnating because you refuse to evolve." Adrien's jaw tightened. "Theo has vision? Or maybe Theo has his hands in my pocket and his dick in my wife," he interrupted harshly. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Keep your voice down," she pleaded, glancing toward the hallway. "Mia could hear you." "Oh, I'm sure Mia would love to know what her mother's been up to," Adrien said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. He gathered the papers into a folder, his movements deliberate, cold. But don't worry, he added. I'm not having this conversation here. I've called Liam. He'll be meeting us at the office in an hour. Liam, why is our lawyer involved? Vanessa's voice cracked, her composure fully slipping now. Because what you've done isn't just adultery, Vanessa, Adrien said flatly, his voice thick with a controlled fury. It's embezzlement, fraud. Vanessa stared at him, horror and disbelief overtaking her. You're serious? Get dressed, Adrien said, standing and tucking the folder under his arm. I'll wait in the car. The drive to the office was a blur. In the conference room, Liam Porter looked grave as he reviewed the documents Adrien had brought. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed the situation. These are serious allegations. If what Adrien is showing me is accurate, Vanessa, you could be facing criminal charges. Vanessa's eyes were wide with panic now, her usual confident demeanor completely unraveled. This is ridiculous, she spat, but there was no conviction in her words. I'm a CFO. I made business decisions. Liam didn't hesitate. You made fraudulent payments to a company owned by someone you're having an affair with, and you were simultaneously negotiating to sell the company without Adrien's knowledge or consent. There's no scenario where this looks legitimate. Vanessa's shoulders sagged, and her eyes welled with tears. Adrien, please, she begged, her voice small. We can fix this, for Mia's sake, if nothing else. Adrien's silence was deafening before he finally spoke. You should have thought about Mia before you started dismantling her future. Tears blurred Vanessa's vision. What do you want? She asked, defeated. Divorce, Adrien said coldly, his words final, irreversible. You sign over your shares in the company. You take no alimony. In exchange, I won't press charges for the embezzlement. Vanessa gasped, the air knocked from her lungs. 20 years of marriage and you want to throw it all away? Adrien's eyes darkened, his voice steady. I didn't throw it away. You did. Every time you met with Reynolds, every time you diverted company funds, every time you lied to my face about it. And what about Mia? Have you even considered what this will do to her? His jaw clenched, his temper barely contained. Don't use our daughter as a shield. This is between you and me. Mia stays with me. She needs her mother, Vanessa countered desperately, but Adrien stood firm. She's 16, not 6, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Liam cleared his throat, attempting to cool the flames. I suggest we all take a day to cool off. I'll draft preliminary separation papers and we can reconvene tomorrow. Vanessa rose, her purse clutched tightly in her hand. This isn't over, Adrien, not by a long shot. Once she had gone, Liam turned to Adrien with a look of concern. Are you sure about this? Once we start down this road. I'm sure, Adrien interrupted, his voice dark and resolute. She betrayed everything we built together. There's no coming back from that. When Adrien returned home, the house was quiet. A note on the counter informed him that Vanessa had taken Mia shopping and they wouldn't be back until dinner. He felt an odd relief. The time alone would give him space to prepare for the conversation that loomed ahead. In the workshop, the rhythmic sound of sanding and shaping wood filled the air, grounding him in something familiar. The jewelry box he was crafting, a gift he had intended for Vanessa, was nearly finished. As his hands moved over the walnut and maple, he realized he was finishing it not for her, but for himself. A twisted form of closure, a ritual of ending. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him from his reverie. Voices, Vanessa's and Mia's, mingled with a deeper, unmistakable voice. Theo Reynolds. A surge of fury rose in Adrien's chest, a raw, violent fire. He set down his tools, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't ready for the confrontation that was about to unfold, but he would face it nonetheless. He would tear down everything. Adrien's voice cracked through the tense silence like a whip. You've got some explaining to do. The words were almost a growl, dripping with bitterness and fury. He stood in the doorway, his presence an iron weight pressing down on everything in the room. Mia's eyes flickered upward from her homework, sensing the change in the air before she saw the storm brewing on her father's face. Hey, Dad. She tried to smile, but it faltered as she met his gaze. The slight narrowing of his eyes, the rigid set of his brow sent a chill down her spine. Mom ran into Mr. Reynolds at the mall. He offered to help with the bags, Mia explained, her voice bright but cautious, trying to smooth over the unspoken tension. But Adrien didn't respond immediately. His eyes locked onto Theo's, a long, cold stare that could freeze a man's soul. The air thickened. Interesting coincidence, Adrien muttered, almost under his breath, his words laced with a biting edge. Vanessa entered smoothly, her heels clicking on the floor as she stepped between the two men. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Adrien, Theo was just leaving. Theo, looking uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Actually, I was hoping to talk to both of you about tomorrow's meeting. Clear the air a bit. Adrien scoffed, the sound bitter and dismissive. There is no meeting tomorrow. His gaze snapped to Theo, hard as granite. And you need to leave now. Mia blinked in confusion, her gaze darting between the adults. What's going on? Her voice wavered, laced with concern. Vanessa's quick response was nearly automatic. Nothing for you to worry about, honey, just business. Adrien's hollow laugh pierced the room. Business? Is that what we're calling it? The sarcasm dripped from his words like venom. Theo shifted uneasily, sensing the tension escalating. Perhaps this isn't the best time. I'll call you later, Vanessa. Adrien's tone became sharp, his anger rising. Don't call her at all. His voice was low, lethal. Don't contact my wife. Don't come to my home. And stay the hell away from my daughter. Mia's eyes widened in shock at her father's uncharacteristic aggression. Dad? She gasped, unable to process what was unfolding. Theo raised his hands in a placating gesture, his voice soft but measured. I understand you're upset, Adrien. Adrien cut him off, his anger boiling over. You think this is about your pathetic attempt to buy my company? His voice was a growl now. This is about you sleeping with my wife while conspiring to steal what I've built. The words hung in the air like an electric charge, and the kitchen fell into stunned silence. Mia's gaze shot to her mother, her face searching for a denial, but when none came, her face crumpled. Mom, she whispered, the word breaking like glass in the room. Is that true? Vanessa's hand reached out instinctively, but Mia pulled away, her eyes searching for something that wasn't there. Is it true? She repeated, her voice trembling. Yes, Adrien answered, his voice like a knife through the silence. It's true. Along with embezzling company funds to finance whatever this is. He gestured sharply between Vanessa and Theo. You bastard! Vanessa's face twisted into a sneer. You had no right to bring this up in front of Mia. You brought it into our home, Adrien shot back, his words icy. You made it her business when you invited your lover here. Mia stumbled back, her hands trembling as she wiped at the tears streaming down her face. I can't believe this. I can't, she choked, her voice breaking as she fled upstairs, her bedroom door slamming shut in her wake. Theo stood there awkwardly for a moment, glancing between the Mercer family. I should go, he muttered. You think? Adrien's voice was sharp, bitter. He stepped aside, his gesture mocking. By all means. After Theo left, the storm inside Adrien still raged, but he remained still, his gaze now focused on Vanessa. How dare you, she spat, her eyes blazing with anger, humiliating me in front of our daughter. Adrien's voice was cold, final. Save it. He cut her off before she could say more. I'm done with your manipulations. Pack a bag. You are not staying here tonight. Vanessa blinked, her eyes widening in disbelief. You can't kick me out of my own home. Adrien's voice was as cold as steel. My home? He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Built with my hands. Paid for with my company's money. Money you've been stealing, so yes I can, I am. Go to a hotel, go to your mother's. Go to your lover, I don't care where you go. Just go. Vanessa stared at him, searching his face for any trace of the man she'd once known. But it was gone. His eyes were steely, resolute. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. But this isn't over. You're right about that, Adrien agreed, his words like ice. It's just beginning. Vanessa left, taking only the remnants of her pride with her. Adrien waited still for a long moment before heading upstairs. His knock on Mia's door was gentle, hesitant. Mia, it's Dad. Can we talk? There was no answer, but he could hear the muffled sobbing from within. I know this is a lot to take in. His voice was soft now, filled with regret. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." Still, there was no response. Sighing, Adrien turned and descended the stairs again, each step heavier than the last. He sank into his armchair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The whiskey in his glass was the only thing grounding him as the shadows crept in, filling the corners of the room. The house, once a symbol of pride, of success, now felt like a tomb, cold and lifeless, echoing with the memories of a life that was falling apart. His family, his company, his life. It was all slipping through his fingers. But then, as the darkness of the evening swallowed him whole, a quiet, burning resolve began to harden in his chest. The pain of betrayal crystallized into something more dangerous, something cold, deliberate, and unstoppable. Vanessa and Theo had underestimated him. They thought he was too blind to see their treachery, too weak to fight back. They were wrong. Adrien Mercer wasn't just a builder. He was a planner, a strategist, a man who understood that the foundation was everything. And now he would use those same skills to carefully, methodically, and irrevocably destroy everything they thought they had taken from him. They wanted to tear apart his life, his legacy. He would make sure they regretted it for the rest of their lives. And the worst part? He hadn't even started yet. Adrien's fingers tightened around the edge of the conference table as his eyes roamed over the walls lined with photographs. They had once been symbols of triumph, visions of their company's growth, their collaborative success. But now each image felt like a mockery. There she was again, Vanessa, his wife, beside him at every ribbon cutting, at every groundbreaking event. The woman who had once stood proudly beside him was now nothing more than a phantom of false loyalty, a shadow and a lie he had lived for years. His phone buzzed on the table, slicing through the thick silence. It was Liam, his lawyer. Vanessa's lawyer had called. They wanted a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Adrien's fingers flew over the screen, his reply curt, "I'll be there." The echo of his phone's screen locking was the only sound as he stood up, his legs stiff from too much sitting, too much thinking. The office, once filled with the hum of creative collaboration, now felt like a mausoleum of his hopes. He glanced at his watch, 6:30 p.m. Vanessa was gone. Mia, too. The house would be empty when he got back. As he stepped out onto the deck, the cool evening air bit at his skin. He should eat, his body reminded him, but the thought of food made his stomach churn. He poured a glass of whiskey instead, the amber liquid swirling like his thoughts. He needed something stronger than food to face the ruins of his life. The silence of the lake stretched out before him, broken only by the crunch of gravel under tires. Expecting Vanessa, he tensed, but the car that rolled into the driveway wasn't hers. It was Paul Palmer's old Volvo. The door creaked open and Mia emerged, her gait slow, burdened. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes hollow from tears. Adrien's chest tightened at the sight of her, his daughter, caught in the crossfire of his failing marriage. He met her at the door, his voice soft, a whisper against the weight of the moment. "Hey, you okay?" Mia didn't meet his gaze as she dropped her backpack, her face scrunched in exhaustion. "Not really," she muttered, then added, almost mechanically, "Have you eaten?" "I can make something," Adrien offered, though he didn't move from the spot. She shook her head. "I had dinner at Zoe's." She hesitated before asking, her voice barely audible. "Is Mom here?" "No, she's staying with Grandma Patty." Relief passed over Mia like a soft breeze, her posture straightening a fraction. "Good, I don't think I can face her yet." They settled into the living room, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a hollow shell. Mia broke the silence first. "Did you know?" Adrien's gaze drifted toward the fireplace, the flames casting shadows on his face. "Before yesterday, I suspected something was off," he confessed, his voice low, steady. "But I only confirmed it this weekend. The affair, the money, everything." His voice cracked with the finality of the revelation. "How could she do this to us, Mia? To you, to me?" Mia's voice trembled, her words tight with a grief that tore through Adrien like a knife. "To you, you have given her everything." Her words hung in the air like a dagger aimed at his chest. Adrien swallowed hard, the weight of her pain crashing over him. His heart twisted, but he couldn't give her the comfort she needed. He had none to offer. I don't have answers, Mia. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love the most. It doesn't mean they don't love them. It just means they love something else more. What? Like Mr. Reynolds? Mia's voice turned bitter, sharp. He's such a phony, always talking about his vacation homes and his private jets. Adrien raised an eyebrow. You've met him before? Mia turned her face away, her expression hardening. Mom introduced us a couple of months ago. She said he was a business associate, someone interested in mentoring young people in real estate. He even offered me an internship for the summer. The realization hit Adrien like a punch to the gut. Theo Reynolds hadn't just been seducing his wife and stealing his company. He had been positioning himself to replace Adrien in every facet of his life, his marriage, his business, and now even his daughter. What are you going to do then? Mia's voice broke through his thoughts, a whisper of vulnerability in the question. Adrien's gaze sharpened, his mind already plotting his next steps. I'm going to protect what's ours, the company, the house, your future. He hesitated, his voice darkening. Beyond that, I don't know yet. Are you going to forgive her? The question was small, fragile, as if Mia were asking him to undo everything. No, Adrien replied immediately without hesitation. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, Mia. Mia nodded slowly, a fragile strength in her demeanor. I think I'm going to bed. It's been a long day. Of course, we can talk more tomorrow if you want. Mia paused on the stairs, her eyes finding his in the dim light of the hallway. Dad, promise me something. Anything, he said, his voice raw with the weight of the moment. Don't let them win. Don't let Mom and Mr. Reynolds take what is yours. Adrien's expression hardened, the steel of his resolve flashing through. I promise. After Mia disappeared upstairs, Adrien returned to the deck, his mind spinning with a dark clarity. This wasn't just about Vanessa's betrayal anymore. Theo Reynolds had declared war on his life, and Adrien would fight back. Not with rage, but with a calculated precision. He reached for his phone, dialing Liam's number before the thought could fully form in his mind. It's late, Adrien, Liam's voice came through, concerned. Everything okay? I need information on Theo Reynolds, Adrien said, his tone flat and commanding. Everything you can find. His business dealings, his personal life, his skeletons, especially anything connected to Westlake Strategies. Liam paused, his voice dropping lower. What are you planning? Just gathering information, Adrien replied smoothly. For the divorce proceedings. This isn't like you. Adrien's voice turned cold, ice coating every word. The old me died the moment I found out my wife and her lover were systematically destroying everything I've built. He exhaled sharply, his jaw clenched. You're either with me on this, Liam, or I'll find someone who is. A long pause. I have a contact, Liam finally said. Former FBI, works in private security now. She's discreet and thorough. Send me her information. That night, in the solitude of his home office, Adrien created a new email account. He reached out to Liam's contact, Valerie Marsh. Her response came swiftly, professional, to the point. Her rates were high, but that was the least of his worries. The email she sent in return was brief and businesslike. Mr. Mercer, I understand the need for discretion. I can begin immediately. I suggest a comprehensive approach. Financial records, personal history, professional connections, and surveillance if necessary. Is there anything specific you're looking for? Adrien's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He typed his response carefully, the weight of his words deliberate. Everything, especially anything he wouldn't want made public. I want to know about his relationship with my wife, how it started, how deep it goes, and if she's just another conquest in a long line. I want to know who Theo Reynolds really is beneath the polished suits and smooth talk. He hit send, and the moment the email was gone, a strange calm washed over him. The initial burn of betrayal had faded, leaving only a cold, clear resolve. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out his leather-bound notebook, the one he used for sketching his house designs. On the first blank page, he wrote a single word: revenge. Then, with methodical precision, he began his lists. One for Theo Reynolds, one for Vanessa. Weaknesses, vulnerabilities, Pressure points, a blueprint for destruction. By the time morning came, Adrien had barely slept, but his mind was sharper than it had been in days. Vanessa had dismantled his present, but he would destroy their future, not out of blind rage, but with the cold, calculated precision of a master builder. He knew that to bring down a structure, one had to first identify its critical supports and then, one by one, remove them. The mediation session with Vanessa and her lawyer unfolded just as Adrien had feared: tense, charged with accusations, and ultimately unproductive. Vanessa, poised and immaculate despite the storm brewing between them, seemed almost detached from the gravity of the situation. Her lawyer, Barbara Wilkins, stood firm, presenting her case with practiced smoothness. Yet the audacity of Vanessa's demands cut through the air like a blade. Half of the company in the lake house. Adrien's stomach tightened as he fought to keep his voice steady. Given Mrs. Mercer's significant contributions to the business over the years, Barbara began, but Adrien scoffed aloud, cutting her off mid-sentence. Contributions? Like embezzling company funds to finance an affair with a competitor? Is that what you call contributions? His voice dripped with scorn. Barbara's eyes flickered, but her response was swift, smooth, too practiced. Those are unsubstantiated allegations. She placed an air of absolute certainty in her words. My client categorically denies any financial impropriety. Adrien let out a dry laugh. Oh, really? His hand slid across the table, placing a thick folder before them with a deliberate thud. I think you'll find these a bit harder to deny. Liam, his lawyer, leaned forward, pushing the folder towards Barbara. Inside, the damning evidence lay: bank transfers to Westlake Strategies Incorporated, a company owned by none other than Theo Reynolds, the man Vanessa had not so accidentally started an affair with. Barbara hesitated, her professional mask slipping for a moment as her eyes scanned the documents. We'll need time to review these claims, she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. Take all the time you need, Adrien responded coldly, but understand this: your client committed fraud. The only reason she's not facing criminal charges right now is my desire to protect our daughter from further trauma. Vanessa, who had been unnervingly quiet up to that point, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Adrien, please. We can work this out without destroying everything. Adrien's eyes locked onto hers for the first time in months, and he felt the weight of their shared history press down on him. He leaned forward, voice low, dangerous. That's rich coming from you. Vanessa flinched, but Adrien wasn't finished. Tell me, when did it start? The affair with Reynolds, was it before or after you started funneling my money to him? Vanessa's eyes darted nervously to Barbara, who nodded ever so slightly. We reconnected at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last year, she explained, her tone flat but defensive. Things were difficult between us. He understood me in ways you stopped trying years ago. Reconnected. Adrien caught the word, the lie. His blood simmered as he absorbed this new piece of the puzzle. You knew him before. He leaned in closer, the question sharper now. In college. Was it serious then? A flicker of something, fear, guilt, Adrien couldn't tell, crossed Vanessa's face. It wasn't serious then. She looked away, but Adrien could see the cracks forming in the facade she'd carefully built for years. And the money he pressed, voice icy, was that his idea or yours? Adrien's words sliced through the air, and Barbara tried to intervene. That's enough. We're not here to litigate past grievances. We're here to discuss an equitable division of assets moving forward. Adrien ignored her, his gaze never leaving Vanessa's face. Here's what's going to happen, he said, voice steady, but cold as steel. Vanessa signs over her shares in the company. She walks away with a one-time settlement of $500,000. No alimony, no claim on the house. In exchange, I don't press charges for embezzlement. Barbara sputtered. That's absurd. Mrs. Mercer is entitled to half of what we built together? Adrien met her gaze, unwavering. But she wasn't building, was she? She was systematically dismantling. Ask your client about that before you push for more. Minta, standing, Adrien began gathering his papers. You have 24 hours to accept the offer. After that, I go to the police with everything I have. His eyes locked with Vanessa's as he said the next words, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. You wouldn't, she said, her voice breaking, but Adrien didn't flinch. Think about Mia, Vanessa added, her voice desperate. I am thinking about Mia, Adrien said, his words cold as ice. I'm thinking about the example I want to set for her. That actions have consequences. That betrayal has a price. Turning to leave, he paused and looked back at Vanessa. By the way, she's decided to stay with me. Seems she's not interested in living with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. The meeting left Adrien feeling strangely hollow, the satisfaction of a victory that tasted bitter in his mouth. As he drove back to the office, the buzzing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. An email from Valerie Marsh. Preliminary findings attached. Call when you can review. Adrien wasted no time, opening the report. His eyes skimmed the findings, heart pounding faster with each new revelation. Theo Reynolds was a predator in more ways than one. 3 failed marriages, each to women whose companies he later acquired. Financial irregularities in at least 2 of those businesses before their sale. A pending lawsuit from a former business partner alleging fraud, settled under a non-disclosure agreement. And, most telling of all, a high-stakes gambling habit, draining him of 6 figures in the last year. Adrien's pulse quickened. The pieces were falling into place. He picked up the phone, dialing Valerie immediately. Miss Marsh, Adrien Mercer. I've reviewed your report. Mr. Mercer. Valerie's voice was calm, professional. I'm glad you found it informative. It's just the beginning, of course. It's very thorough. The gambling debts, Adrien said, cutting straight to the point. Are they verifiable? Yes. My source works security at the Monarch Club. Reynolds is a regular. Lately, he's been losing more than he wins. Valerie paused, then added, the pattern with his previous marriages is clear, but is there proof of financial manipulation? Nothing concrete, Valerie admitted, but I'm still digging. His second wife might be willing to talk. She didn't sign an NDA during their divorce. Adrien mulled this over. I want to meet her, and I want surveillance on Reynolds, particularly his meetings with my wife. Already underway, Valerie assured him. I'll set up a meeting with Catherine Reynolds. Anything else? Adrien hesitated before answering, his mind working quickly. Yes, find out everything you can about Vanessa's college years. She knew Reynolds back then. I want to know how well. That evening, Adrien maintained his facade of normality for Mia's sake. They cooked dinner together, pasta with his grandmother's famous sauce recipe. They talked about safe topics, Mia's physics project, the vintage car show coming to town, the new Netflix series they were both watching. It was almost like before, almost. Dad, Mia asked as they cleared the dishes, her voice tentative. Can I ask you something? Of course, Adrien replied, trying to keep his tone light. Are you okay? Mia's voice trembled slightly. Really okay? I mean, not just saying you are. Adrien paused, considering his words carefully before answering. I'm functioning. Some moments are harder than others. Mia nodded, turning to load the dishwasher. I talked to Mom today, she said, her voice neutral. Adrien's heart skipped a beat. Oh? She called? Yeah, Mia replied, still not meeting his eyes. She wants to see me, explain her side. Adrien's stomach twisted, but he kept his composure. And what did you say? Mia's voice was careful. I told her I need more time. That's fair, Adrien said, relief flooding him. You take all the time you need. Mia paused, then continued, her tone shifting. The thing is, she said some stuff about you, that you're not being reasonable, that you're trying to ruin her life because you're hurt. Adrien set the plate he was rinsing down on the counter, turning fully to face his daughter. What do you think? He asked, his voice soft but steady. Mia shrugged, her gaze still averted. I think she's the one who ruined everything, Dad. Adrien's fingers curled around the smooth edges of the jewelry box, the one he had been crafting for Vanessa with the precision of a man who had once believed in the possibility of reconciliation. His mind buzzed, cold and calculating, as he ran his hand across the polished wood, tracing the intricate inlay he'd designed, a tribute to the wildflowers of the meadow where he'd proposed to her. The memory of that moment, so full of love and promise, now felt like a cruel joke. A surge of rage suddenly gripped him. He couldn't bear it anymore. Couldn't bear the illusion of what his life had been, the life he had built with Vanessa, a life built on lies, betrayal, and the empty veneer of affection. His arms shot out, and with a force that matched the fury inside him, he hurled the jewelry box against the wall. It shattered on impact, the pieces scattering across the room, each fragment a symbol of everything that had been destroyed. But no catharsis came. The destruction felt hollow, an echo as empty as his heart. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Valerie. He opened the email with the same detached precision he now applied to everything. There in front of him was another set of photographs. This time it was Vanessa, sitting in a restaurant with Theo Reynolds. Their intimacy was undeniable. Theo's hand resting possessively on her back, their body language speaking volumes. In one, they were entering what looked like a hotel, their closeness a stark contrast to the hollow distance Adrien felt in his own life. Adrien's gaze didn't waver as he studied the images, but inside there was no fury, no pain, just cold calculation. They were getting careless. That could be useful. Minutes later, another email arrived. Adrien clicked it open, and his eyes fell on a newspaper clipping from 23 years ago. It showed a younger Vanessa standing in the center of a group, her arms around Theo's waist. A headline declared, "Business School Sweethearts." A photograph of them beaming proudly beside the caption, "Vanessa Lawson and Theodore Reynolds take first place with their innovative real estate investment model." Adrien's stomach churned as he read the words, the implications hitting him harder than the earlier photographs. The affair wasn't a brief moment of weakness last year. It had been an ongoing connection, one that had never truly ended. Vanessa had chosen Theo long before their marriage was ever a thing. Adrien surveyed his workshop, the broken jewelry box, the discarded tools, the unfinished projects that had once carried the promise of a future now tainted by deceit. All those years, 20 years of marriage, a daughter, a company, built on a foundation of lies. That night, something inside Adrien Mercer broke. The last remnants of the man who still clung to hope, to second chance, crumbled away. And in his place emerged something darker. Someone capable of vengeance, calculated, cold, and ruthless. Someone who wouldn't stop until everything was reduced to ash. Adrien cleaned up the broken pieces of the jewelry box, throwing them in the trash with grim finality. His eyes locked on the untouched pieces of his latest project. It was a chess set, each piece meticulously crafted from contrasting woods, dark walnut and pale maple. The game had begun, and Adrien knew exactly where he would start, with the king. With himself, the next 2 weeks saw Adrien love a life of duality. By day, he was the stoic businessman, meeting with lawyers, reassuring clients, maintaining the appearance of a man whose life hadn't just been torn apart by betrayal. By night, he was a different man. He became the architect of destruction, his workshop now a war room. The chess set grew piece by piece, each edition a silent testament to his growing resolve. Valerie had provided him with the information he needed. Layers of corruption beneath Theo Reynolds' polished exterior. Shell companies, ruined partners, former employees silenced with threats and non-disclosure agreements. Theo had been careful, but not careful enough. Adrien should have felt victorious. Vanessa had accepted the terms of the divorce. Her lawyer had crumbled when Liam provided irrefutable evidence of financial misconduct. The settlement was in progress, and the company shares were being transferred. Yet there was no sense of triumph within him, only cold resolve, a determination that burned like ice in his veins. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The most critical piece of the puzzle had fallen into place when Valerie arranged a meeting with Catherine Reynolds, Theo's second ex-wife. Adrien sat across from her in a modest living room where the weight of her experience hung heavy in the air. Catherine, still beautiful in her 40s, seemed worn by the years, by the hard lessons life had taught her. She sipped her tea slowly, as if choosing her words with the caution of someone who had been burned too many times. "He'll destroy her, you know," Catherine said softly, her eyes distant as she stared into the cup. Adrien nodded grimly. "He's after what belongs to me, my company, my family." Catherine smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Not just that. Theo doesn't care about things. What he wants is to win, to take what belongs to someone else. He doesn't just ruin businesses. He destroys lives, one acquisition at a time." She leaned forward, her voice low. "He's been doing this for years. When I was married to him, I had a small chain of boutiques. By the time he left, they were all closed, and somehow he owned the real estate. It wasn't until it was too late that I saw the full extent of his game. Adrien's heart skipped a beat. And there were others, he asked, already knowing the answer. Catherine nodded. At least two that I know of. One was a client's wife during our marriage. The other was before your wife, a woman named Patricia Powell. She owned a landscaping business. He took it for a development project. Adrien's breath caught in his throat. Patricia Powell? He leaned forward, his mind racing. That's my mother-in-law. Catherine's eyes widened in shock. What? No, that can't be a coincidence. It's no coincidence, Adrien agreed, his voice tight with realization. She's been complicit in all of this. Catherine's gaze met his steadily, and she asked the question that hung in the air, unspoken but clear. What are you going to do? Adrien didn't hesitate. His response was quiet, but resolute. What would you do if you could go back, knowing what you know now? Catherine didn't think for a moment before answering. I'd burn it all down. Him, his reputation, his business, everything. Adrien smiled coldly. That's exactly what I intend to do. His voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. And I think you can help me. Later that night, as he added another piece to his chess set and solidified another part of his plan, Adrien realized just how deep the web of betrayal ran. The connection between Patricia Powell and Theo Reynolds had confirmed what he had suspected all along. This wasn't just a random affair. It was a calculated move, one that had been in motion long before Adrien had ever suspected it. And Vanessa, his wife, had been the pawn, unaware of how she was being manipulated. His phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Can we talk when I get home? Important. Adrien's fingers hesitated over the keys, his thoughts still on the web of betrayal and revenge he was carefully weaving. Of course, everything okay? He replied. Just need to talk. See you at 6 o'clock. When Mia arrived, she was quiet, her steps hesitant as she walked into the kitchen. Adrien kept his voice light, trying to mask the tension in his body as he prepared dinner. What's up? Mia's eyes darted to the floor, her hands nervously fiddling with her backpack straps. I saw Mom today, she said, her voice soft, almost too soft. She was waiting outside school. Adrien Mercer's hand lingered over the knife, its sharp edge gleaming briefly under the soft kitchen light. He kept his face impassive as his daughter's voice cracked the silence, shattering whatever fragile calm he had left. The vegetables on the cutting board seemed irrelevant now, their colors dull and lifeless compared to the weight of what Mia was about to say. Weird, she muttered, sinking into the bar stool with the weight of the world on her shoulders. She cried a lot, said she made a terrible mistake. Wants to come home. The words were jagged, like shards of glass cutting through the stillness. Adrien's chest tightened as something cold began to settle in his gut, an unsettling stillness that he couldn't quite shake. What did you tell her? His voice, though steady, betrayed a flicker of something darker. Mia's eyes were downcast, her face a portrait of uncertainty. That it's not up to me, she replied softly, her voice tremulous, the undercurrent of confusion obvious. But Dad, she seemed really sorry. She said Mr. Reynolds manipulated her, made her think you'd lose everything if she didn't help him. Adrien's hands stilled, fingers curling around the knife handle, his thoughts sharp and racing. And you believe her? His voice, though quiet, carried a weight that no words could ease. Mia shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flickering toward the floor. I don't know, she whispered. She's still my mom. And she said something about Grandma Patty. A bitter taste filled his mouth. What about her? That she dated Mr. Reynolds a few years ago. It ended badly, she said. And she said he's been planning this for years, getting close to our family. The words hit Adrien like a punch, each one heavier than the last, his mind trying to grasp the implications. Mia hesitated before speaking again, her voice small but filled with a sense of lost hope. Is that true? Adrien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he resumed chopping, each slice a desperate attempt to focus his thoughts. He needed to buy time to ground himself before he answered. Catherine Reynolds confirmed it, he finally said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Your grandmother used to have a landscaping business. Reynolds wanted it, and he used her to get close. Mia's face twisted in disbelief. That's messed up, she muttered, as if the enormity of the web they were caught in was finally starting to sink in. So, what Mom's saying, could it be true? She asked, her voice faltering. Adrien set the knife down again, a rare moment of vulnerability flickering across his face as he turned to meet her gaze. Mia, your mother is an intelligent woman. She's the CFO of a successful company. She didn't make mistakes, she made choices. Choices to have an affair, to divert funds, to lie to me. His voice dropped an octave, darkening with the weight of truth. Those weren't mistakes. They were calculated. But if Reynolds manipulated her, then she allowed herself to be manipulated. Mia's shoulders slumped, the air around them thick with the hurt she wasn't yet ready to fully face. So you won't forgive her, even if she's sorry? Adrien looked at her, the exhaustion from the weight of it all painted clearly in his eyes. The face of the daughter who had loved her mother, who still clung to some shred of hope for a family that no longer existed. Some betrayals cut too deep, Mia, he said quietly, the words harsh but true. It's not just about forgiveness. It's about trust. I could never trust her again. I get it, Mia whispered, though her expression said otherwise. I miss how things were. Adrien exhaled, the breath shaky, before pulling her into a rare embrace. Me too, he murmured, his voice raw. But we'll build something new, you and me. I promise. Later after dinner, as Mia disappeared into her room to tackle homework, Adrien retreated to his sanctuary, the workshop. The quiet hum of his surroundings gave him space to think, to center himself. His hands brushed over the almost completed chess set, the polished pieces gleaming like miniature monuments to his patience and skill. Each piece had its own story, except one. The opposing king, Theo Reynolds, was still missing, and Adrien had saved it for last. The phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. Valerie Marsh's name flashed across the screen. He didn't hesitate. Mr. Mercer, she said urgently, I have something you need to see immediately. Can you meet me? 20 minutes later, Adrien was sitting in Valerie's car, staring at a file of documents that threatened to topple the carefully built world around him. Reynolds was drowning in debt, gambling debts that far surpassed what anyone had imagined. Close to $500,000, Valerie explained, her voice clipped with professional detachment. He's leveraged everything, his company, his future, to cover the losses, but his creditors are closing in. Adrien absorbed the information in silence, his mind whirring. And Vanessa? What does she know about this? Valerie handed him another folder, her face darkening. Based on their communications, she's been helping him, helping manage the cash flow problems, hence the embezzlement. Adrien flipped the folder open, the weight of each document pressing against his chest. But what caught his eye wasn't just the financial manipulations. It was the damning evidence of a deeper conspiracy. Patricia Powell, his mother-in-law, had been in on it. The emails between her and Theo Reynolds were dated back years, detailing not just business transactions, but the intimate, toxic dealings between the two. Theo, she's still uncertain. Adrien suspects nothing. But Vanessa has these inconvenient attacks of conscience. Remind her what's at stake, Patty. The final blow came with the mention of the lakefront property. Adrien's mind raced, suddenly clear. Reynolds doesn't just want my company, he murmured, his heart pounding. He wants the lake house too. Valerie nodded. It's the only developable parcel for miles. He can't acquire it through normal means. So he's using your wife to get to it. Adrien's hands clenched, rage curling deep in his chest. He had built that house. It wasn't just a home. It was his sanctuary, his life's work. Now it was a pawn in a ruthless game. They've been planning this for years, he said, his voice low and bitter. Using Vanessa to get to the company, to the property. Valerie's voice was sharp. What do you want to do with this information? The old Adrien, the one who believed in justice and right and wrong, would have gone straight to the police. But the new Adrien, the one who'd learned the cost of betrayal, knew better. Keep digging, especially into Patricia Powell, and get me into the Monarch Club on Thursday night. I need to meet Theo Reynolds. Valerie raised an eyebrow. That won't be easy. It's an exclusive club. Make it happen, Adrien insisted, a cold determination in his voice. It's time I met him properly, not as the betrayed husband, but as the man who's going to destroy him. The moment Valerie left, Adrien retreated back to his workshop. The chess set lay before him, the final piece ready to be carved. With deliberate precision, he began working, shaping Theo Reynolds into the very king that would fall. As the final strokes of the chisel fell into place, Adrien placed the dark walnut king on the board, surrounded by its remaining pieces. Vanessa the queen, Patricia the bishop, and Adrien's own forces, positioned for the final checkmate. The trap was set. Now all he had to do was spring it. The pieces were in place, and Adrien Mercer was ready to make his move. "Just do it," Adrien had told Liam earlier, his voice cold and deliberate. "And make sure it's prominently featured in the agreement. I want her to notice it." Liam's tone had shifted, the concern evident even through the phone. "What are you planning?" "Justice," Adrien had replied, as simple as that. Long overdue, but about to be delivered. It had been weeks, weeks of pain, of simmering rage, and most of all, planning. And Adrien had come to terms with the betrayal, with the sharp sting of his wife's infidelity, and the theft of everything he'd worked for. But now the board had been set. The players were in position, and Adrien Mercer, architect of his own quiet vengeance, was prepared to bring the game to its deadly conclusion. The Monarch Club, the very name of it, suggested an air of elusive opulence. Hidden away atop a bland office building downtown, its existence was known only to the city's elite, the powerful, the corrupt, the untouchable. Adrien had arrived precisely at 11 o'clock p.m., dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to navigate high-stakes environments, both in business and in life. This was no longer about the house, or the company, or the humiliation of a broken marriage. This was something else entirely. Thanks to Valerie's arrangements, Adrien had secured entry through a real estate investor who owed her a favor, a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. The five-figure buy-in was a triviality. Money was now just a tool, a means to an end. As the elevator doors slid open, Adrien stepped into the reception area, sterile, windowless, and undeniably exclusive. The attendant, clad in dark suit and tie, checked his name against the guest list with a quick glance before stepping aside. Beyond, the room revealed a blend of old-world luxury and power, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, subdued lighting that softened the harsh lines of the men and women who lounged within. This was a room for kings and conquerors, where every glance, every word, was weighed with significance. Adrien's gaze swept the room, scanning for his target. He didn't have to search long. Theo Reynolds, his wife's lover and would-be destroyer of everything Adrien had built, was easy to spot, sitting at the center of the main poker table, surrounded by sycophants and hangers-on, holding court with his usual arrogance. Adrien could almost taste the bitterness in the air as he moved to the bar, ordering a whiskey he had no intention of drinking. His mind was sharp, focused. There would be no distractions. Reynolds, of course, noticed him almost immediately. At first, the look in his eyes was merely curious, probably trying to place Adrien, a new face in a world where only a select few belonged. But recognition came swiftly, and with it, something more dangerous. Adrien could feel the shift, the underlying tension. After exchanging a few words with his entourage, Theo Reynolds stood and moved toward the bar. "Adrien Mercer," he said, his voice the epitome of calculated indifference. "This is unexpected." Adrien raised his glass, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Theo," he nodded slightly, "I didn't realize you were a member here." 7 years now," Reynolds replied smoothly, signaling the bartender for a refill. "First visit, I take it?" Adrien's eyes flicked briefly to the glass in his hand. "I find myself with some extra time these days. Divorce proceedings are surprisingly efficient when one party has nothing left to negotiate." For a brief moment, Reynolds seemed uncomfortable with that truth, but his smile never wavered. "Business is business, Adrien. Nothing personal." Adrien's smile was a blade hidden behind a veil of calm. "Sleeping with my wife while plotting to steal my company and home? That feels rather personal." The bartender placed Reynolds' drink in front of him, and Theo took a long, measured sip. "Vanessa and I have history. Before you." Adrien met his gaze, unwavering. College sweethearts reunited after all these years. Almost romantic, if it weren't so calculated. Reynolds' eyes flickered, a shadow of surprise passing across his face. Adrien had seen through the facade, knew more than he was supposed to. And Patricia Powell, Adrien added casually, swirling his whiskey in the glass. Interesting taste in men, your mother-in-law. That was enough. Theo stiffened, visibly caught off guard by Adrien's knowledge of his past connections. You've been busy, he muttered. Adrien nodded, the sharp edge of his voice quiet but deadly. 3 women, 3 businesses, one Theo Reynolds walking away with everything. It's quite a pattern, wouldn't you say? Reynolds set down his glass, his demeanor shifting into something colder, more guarded. If you came here to threaten me, Adrien cut him off smoothly. Threaten? No. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I can't play poker, but I hear you're quite the enthusiast. Reynolds' expression tightened as he sized Adrien up. The buy-in is steep. I can afford it, Adrien replied, his tone casual, but his gaze locked on Theo's with cold precision. Unless you'd rather not play with me. Reynolds' lips curled into a predatory grin. I'd love to take your money. Consider it a down payment on what you'll lose in the divorce. Adrien's lips quirked upward. We'll see who loses what. The game wore on, the hours slipping by unnoticed as Adrien and Reynolds became locked in a battle far deeper than poker. The table on them seemed to fade into the background as they clashed. 2 men caught in a private war, one that would have far-reaching consequences, no matter who walked away with the most chips. Adrien began cautiously, folding more hands than he played, allowing Theo to build his bravado. The man was aggressive, reckless, a gambler at heart. By 3:00 a.m., Adrien had quietly amassed a formidable stack of chips, while Reynolds, now several drinks deep, was showing signs of wear. His earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by a nervousness that betrayed his bravado. Adrien knew this game. He knew the rules and the players. When Reynolds raised by 20,000, the remaining players folded quickly, leaving only Adrien in the hand. Adrien took his time, studying his cards, a decent pair of kings, and then locked eyes with Reynolds, seeing the telltale twitch at the corner of his mouth. Call, Adrien said calmly, his voice devoid of emotion, and then added, and raise another 50,000. The room murmured. Reynolds' face flushed with anger, or was it alcohol? The two seemed to merge into something dangerous. You're bluffing, Mercer. Am I? Adrien's voice was a quiet, deadly challenge. Only one way to find out. Reynolds looked at his remaining chips. I don't have that much left. Collateral, then, one of the other players suggested with a casual shrug. We're all good for it. Reynolds hesitated, then grimly nodded. Fine, I call. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and tossed it into the pot. My interest in the Hamilton Street development. Worth twice your bet. Adrien didn't flinch. He nodded, accepting the marker. Show your cards. Reynolds turned over his hand triumphantly. Pair of aces, queen high. Adrien didn't react immediately. Instead, he laid down his cards slowly, methodically. Kings with an ace kicker. The table went silent. Reynolds blinked, his eyes widening in disbelief. That's impossible. No, Adrien corrected, his voice a razor's edge. Improbable, not impossible. Much like the odds of you successfully taking my company. Adrien gathered the chips, along with the marker, and stood. Gentlemen, it's been enlightening. Turning to face Reynolds, he added, his voice low but unmistakable. Mr. Reynolds, I'll have my lawyer contact you about claiming my interest in the Hamilton Street project. Theo's face twisted in a mask of rage. This isn't over, Mercer. Adrien's lips curled into a cool, dangerous smile. On the contrary, he said softly, so only Reynolds could hear. It's just beginning. The cool night air kissed Adrien as he walked towards his car, the weight of the first phase of his plan settling comfortably around him. He had won more than just money at the table. Reynolds was financially compromised, his ego, too, crushed beneath the weight of his own arrogance. But more importantly, Adrien had reasserted himself, not as the cuckolded husband, but as a man who had come back to reclaim what was his. A calculating adversary who would stop at nothing to see justice done. This was only the beginning. Adrien Mercer's eyes flicked over the blueprint of Hamilton Street. Each line, each curve seemed to mock him. The plans for the mixed-use luxury project, a towering beacon of Reynolds' ambition, sat before him as the perfect symbol of the wreckage he was determined to inflict. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. He'd been careful, methodical. Every move, every poker hand he had played, every calculation had brought him to this moment. The night before, he'd taken his revenge one step further, claiming the Hamilton Street development for himself. When his lawyer, Liam Porter, had asked how it had all come to be, Adrien had merely shrugged, a dry smirk on his lips. A poker game, he'd said, the words falling from his mouth with a casualness that belied their weight. Liam hadn't been convinced, and who could blame him? Adrien had always played his cards close to his chest, whether they were business or personal. "What game are you playing here?" Liam had asked, concern creeping into his voice. "First the lake house clause in the divorce, now this. These aren't random moves." "No," Adrien had replied, voice low, eyes steely. "They're not." The game had begun long before the cards were on the table, and now it was time to let the pieces fall into place. The next morning, Vanessa had sent a simple message. "We need to talk. It's important." He hadn't hesitated before replying, "My office, 3 p.m. When she arrived, he was seated, focused, reviewing the final drafts of his plans. His mind was sharp, but part of him wasn't there. Part of him was elsewhere, toying with the recent revelation that had come from his investigator, Valerie Marsh. The extent of his wife's betrayal. She had never loved him. She had only ever been a pawn in the game. "You look well," Vanessa remarked, stepping into the room with the air of someone who'd made a deliberate effort to appear calm. Her blue suit, the one he'd once admired, seemed more like armor now. She slid into the chair across from him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "What do you want, Vanessa?" Adrien asked, his gaze never leaving the blueprints. His tone was flat, without malice, yet every word held the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. "I heard about last night," she said softly. "The poker game. Theo's upset." "I imagine he is," Adrien replied coolly, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Losing tends to have that effect." "What are you doing, Adrien?" Her voice softened, though there was an undercurrent of panic. "This vendetta against Theo, against both of you?" "Against both of you," Adrien corrected, his voice steady and unyielding. "Let's not pretend you're an innocent bystander in all of this." Vanessa's shoulders slumped, her gaze dropping to her lap, but Adrien could see the tension in the way she held herself. Her next words were tinged with guilt. "I made mistakes, terrible ones, but this path you're on—" She trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "It won't bring you peace." "I'm not looking for peace," Adrien said, the edge of his voice sharper than before. "I'm looking for justice." A flicker of realization passed across Vanessa's face. "Is that why you added that clause about the lake house?" Her voice was low, hesitant. "A trap?" "A trap," Adrien repeated with a smirk. "No, Vanessa, it's an opportunity for you to show me where your true priorities lie." She leaned forward slightly, her expression softening for the first time. "Adrien, please, for me, for him, if nothing else, we can end this amicably." "Amicably?" Adrien let out a laugh, bitter and cold. "You and your mother and your lover conspired to take everything I built. There's no amicable ending to that story." Vanessa's face blanched. She was barely able to keep herself from trembling. "My mother?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What does she have to do with this?" Adrien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. The papers inside were damning, emails from Valerie, evidence that Vanessa's mother, Patricia, had been more than just a passive bystander in the grand scheme of things. The conspiracy was wider than she'd ever realized. Vanessa's fingers shook as she opened the folder. Adrien watched her closely as her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to horror. Her voice faltered as she whispered, "I didn't know about Mom, I swear. She introduced us, reintroduced us, but I never thought—" Adrien's voice cut through her stammering. "Just like she used you, just like she used the other. Then discarded you when she had no more use for you." Vanessa shook her head, but the denial was weak. Her eyes flicked back to the emails. The truth was sinking in, piece by painful piece. "No," she said, though the conviction had already drained from her voice. "Mom wouldn't—" "She knew exactly what Reynolds was," Adrien said, his voice hardening, "and she sold you out to him anyway." Vanessa recoiled as if struck. "Why are you showing me this?" Because, Adrien replied softly, I want you to understand exactly what you've become a part of. This isn't love, Vanessa. It's business. You're a tool, a pawn, just like your mother was, just like his ex-wives were. Ex-wives? Vanessa looked at him sharply, her breath catching in her throat. 3 of them, Adrien confirmed, his eyes narrowing. All former business owners whose assets mysteriously ended up in Reynolds' portfolio after painful divorces. Sound familiar? Vanessa stood suddenly, her expression a mask of disbelief. I need to go. One more thing, Adrien called as she reached the door. She stopped, her back to him, but the tension in the room had grown unbearable. The family barbecue, he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of something darker. I'll be there. Vanessa turned, alarm flashing across her face. What? What are you talking about? Mia asked me to come, Adrien replied, his tone almost too casual. She doesn't want to face everyone alone. How could I refuse? Her panic was evident now. Adrien, please, not there, not in front of everyone. Adrien's smile was cold, devoid of humor. Worried about what I might say? Vanessa faltered, her voice breaking. Don't, please. You need to worry about what you've been hiding, Adrien said softly, as if the weight of her secrets was already pressing down on her. After she left, Adrien returned to his blueprints, though his mind wandered. The brief flicker of connection with her, the vulnerability in her eyes when she'd read those emails, had caught him off guard. For a split second, he had felt the old ache, the instinct to protect her, to fix things, but it was too late. She had made her choices, and no amount of remorse could undo the damage. The machine was in motion now. It would run its course. That evening, as he put the finishing touches on a chess set in his workshop, his daughter Mia appeared in the doorway. Dad, can I talk to you about something? He set down the pieces with deliberate care, knowing that the conversation was one he had been dreading. Always. Mia stepped inside, her eyes drawn to the chess set. She ran a finger over the intricately carved pieces, each one an uncanny likeness to a person. This is beautiful, she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. When did you start it? About 3 weeks ago, Adrien answered, his tone thoughtful. It helps me think. Mia picked up the opposing king, studying it closely. It's pretty obvious, she said, her voice light but knowing. They look like real people. This one looks like Mom. Adrien's hands stilled. The truth of it, the fact that every piece was an embodiment of someone he had lost or been wronged by, struck him more than he was willing to admit. It's just a project, he said carefully, trying to deflect. Keeps my hands busy during a difficult time. Mia didn't buy it. Mom called me today. She was upset. Said you're planning something for Grandma's barbecue. What is this about, Dad? Adrien's gaze shifted, hardening. You don't need to worry about that. Mia's eyes narrowed, a rare seriousness taking over her young face. Whatever this revenge thing is, with Mr. Reynolds, with Mom, Dad, you need to stop. It's changing you. He watched her, his heart torn. She was right, she always had been. But some changes, some wounds couldn't be healed by the past. Some betrayals cut too deep, Mia. Some things can't be undone. And so you become just like them? Mia challenged. Scheming and plotting? That's not who you are. Maybe it's who I need to be, Adrien said softly, to protect what's ours. Mia stared at him, pleading. We don't need protection anymore, Dad. Mom signed the divorce papers. Mr. Reynolds can't touch your company. It's over. Adrien shook his head. It's not that simple. It could be, Mia said quietly, her eyes filled with a silent plea. If you just let it be. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her skin. I promise you this, he whispered, his voice steady but filled with something tender. After the barbecue, everything will be resolved, one way or another. Mia didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly. Just remember who you really are, okay? You taught me that integrity matters more than winning. As she left the room, Adrien remained there, alone with his thoughts. Her words echoed in his mind, but they didn't stop him. Not anymore. The path ahead was set, and no one, not even Mia, could change it now. The sharp ping of Adrien's phone broke the silence that had stretched too long. The message from Valerie was brief but sharp. A warning wrapped in efficiency. Reynolds is scrambling. Calls to investors are frantic. Hamilton Street project is leveraged against gambling debts. Your claim has triggered a liquidity crisis. He's vulnerable. A slow smile hugged at Adrien's lips as he placed the phone back in his pocket. The first domino had fallen. Theo Reynolds, the architect of betrayal, was teetering on the edge. Desperation, after all, was a powerful motivator, and desperate men were prone to slip-ups. Adrien leaned forward, his eyes falling on the carved chess piece before him, his own likeness frozen in intricate detail. With deliberate care, he lifted it from the board and studied it. He felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The path forward, laid out in perfect clarity before him, was not one of redemption, but of retribution. The trap was almost set. By this time next week, Theo and everyone who had conspired with him would pay the price. But Mia's words, "Remember who you really are," echoed in his mind. Who was he now? The builder or the destroyer? The man of integrity or the architect of vengeance? Adrien placed the king piece back on the board. Perhaps the answer would come soon enough from a place as unexpected as the family barbecue he was about to attend. Patricia Powell's backyard was a scene out of time, a tradition draped in the fragrance of grilled meat in the soft glow of string lights that wound through the trees. It was a ritual that had begun long before the shadow of betrayal had darkened their lives, one that had weathered the passing of Patricia's husband 5 years ago. The same checkered cloths, the same mismatched chairs, the same laughter that never quite reached the eyes. Adrien stood at the edge of the gathering with Mia by his side. They could feel the weight of the stares, the conversations that stilled the moment they entered. News of his separation from Vanessa had spread like wildfire, though the details remained mercifully obscured. He could hear the whispers, the soft hum of judgment simmering under every polite greeting. "Mr. Mercer," Patricia called, her smile brittle, fixed, like porcelain on the edge of cracking. At 65, she still carried herself with grace, her auburn hair as bright as her daughter's, though it was far from natural. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her tone pleasant but edged with something colder. "Mia wanted me here," Adrien replied, his voice even, his gaze locking with hers in a silent challenge. He searched her face for any sign of guilt, of hesitation, but found none. If she felt it, she hid it well, concealed beneath layers of practiced indifference. "Of course, family is family," Patricia replied smoothly, her voice sliding like silk over jagged stones. She turned to Mia, a shift in her expression as she summoned her practice warmth. "Darling, your cousins are by the pool. Why don't you go say hello while I catch up with your father?" Mia hesitated, glancing between them, uncertain, but Adrien nodded gently. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'll be fine. Go on, we need to talk anyway." As Mia reluctantly drifted away, Adrien allowed himself a breath before Patricia led him to a quieter corner of the yard. The moment they were out of earshot, she dropped her facade. "I assume this talk isn't just a social call," she said, her voice turning sharp. Adrien's eyes never wavered. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "About you and Reynolds. About how you set him up with your daughter after he took your business." For a moment, Patricia's composure faltered. The icy mask slipped, just a fraction, before snapping back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she murmured, the words coming too quickly, too carefully. Adrien stepped closer, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "The emails, Patricia, between you and Reynolds, planning to use Vanessa to get to my company, my property." She flinched, though only briefly, before the mask returned. "And what kind of mother sacrifices her own daughter for revenge?" Adrien's voice was colder than the air around them. Patricia hissed in frustration, her voice rising in bitterness. "You don't understand. He destroyed everything. My business, my life. After Harold died, all I had left were debts and broken promises." "And so you serve up Vanessa as what?" Adrien pressed. "Collateral?" Patricia's eyes hardened, her jaw tight. "Vanessa was unhappy anyway. You were so consumed with your precious company, your perfect houses. She was lonely. Theo gave her attention. He gave her a role." "A role in a con," Adrien corrected her flatly. The same con he ran on you, and you knew exactly what he was doing. Patricia shifted uneasily, glancing toward the growing crowd. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Theo promised no one would get hurt. It was just business. Adrien's laugh was humorless, sharp. And you believed him? After everything? After what he did to you? To his 3 ex-wives? Patricia's eyes flickered with surprise, then confusion. 3? I only knew about Catherine. A pattern, Adrien replied coolly. Women with businesses he wants. Seduction, manipulation, financial entanglements. Sound familiar? For a moment, Patricia's shoulders slumped, and Adrien saw the cracks. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, untiring in her pursuit of control, was beginning to unravel. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small, almost pleading. Nothing, Adrien replied, his gaze unwavering. Not yet. For now, we're going to go back to your lovely barbecue and pretend everything is normal. But keep an eye on your daughter, Patricia. She's about to learn exactly what kind of man she's tied her future to. They turned back toward the gathering, and Adrien's gaze landed on Vanessa across the lawn. She was in the midst of a conversation, her posture stiff. When their eyes met, there was an unmistakable shift, a discomfort so palpable it lingered in the space between them. Yeah, Mia's voice cut through the tension, a welcome distraction. She waved him over, her face lighting up with relief. Uncle Scott's asking about the Jensen project. Scott Powell, Vanessa's younger brother, stood with a warm, genuine handshake. Unlike his mother and sister, Scott had always been a straightforward man, and Adrien appreciated that. Good to see you, man, Scott said, his voice friendly, unaffected by the family drama. How's the West Side development coming along? Adrien nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the conversation, the familiarity of work talk. Scott had been one of the first to reach out after the separation news broke, offering support without judgment. Family's still family, whatever Vanessa's done, Scott had said. His words echoed in Adrien's mind as he fell into easy conversation, momentarily grateful for the normalcy, for something not tied to the chaos that had become his life. As the afternoon waned and evening drew near, the gathering grew livelier. Lou, Patricia's neighbor and a retired firefighter, worked the grill with military precision. Children dashed across the yard, their laughter punctuating the air, while adults mingled in clustered groups, drinks in hand. And then, Theo Reynolds arrived. He entered through the side gate as if he had every right to be there, casually dressed, his expensive clothes hugging his frame in a way that screamed wealth. A hush fell over the gathering as he made his way toward Vanessa, his kiss on her cheek a possessive display that rang out in the still air like a bell. Adrien could feel Mia stiffen beside him, her body tense with confusion and discomfort. What is he doing here? Mia whispered, her voice tight with anger. Adrien's response was low, controlled, making a statement. In front of everyone? In front of you? Mia's voice cracked with incredulity. That's so disrespectful. Adrien placed a calming hand on her shoulder, his fingers steady. It's a power play. He wants a reaction. Mia's eyes darted across the yard, landing on Vanessa, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the public display. She shifted, distancing herself slightly from Theo's embrace, though her mother was all too eager to welcome him, introducing him to guests with a false practiced smile. Adrien's gaze sharpened, watching Theo with detached interest. The man was a master of charm, calculating and confident, a predator in a well-tailored suit. Tonight, however, his performance was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, and Adrien had no intention of letting him get away with it. Adrien remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on the dinner table before him, but it was as though the world around him had shifted into sharp focus, his mind sharply alert. The seating arrangement was no accident. Patricia had orchestrated it meticulously, positioning Theo at one end, Adrien at the other, an unmistakable signal of the cold divide that had taken root between them. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the entire room held its breath, waiting for something inevitable to break the surface. Mia, ever the stalwart daughter, silently slid into the seat beside him, her gesture a quiet but resolute declaration of solidarity. Adrien's chest tightened with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She was a beacon of unwavering loyalty in a world rapidly crumbling around him. Vanessa, seated beside Theo, didn't touch her plate. Her eyes flickered, betraying her unease as they darted between Adrien and their daughter. But her posture was poised, as if she could somehow distance herself from the reality of what was unfolding. The conversation, meticulously crafted to avoid any mention of personal matters, meandered around dull topics, community events, a few light-hearted anecdotes, murmurs of upcoming vacations, and gossip about absent neighbors. The chatter flowed smoothly, but beneath the surface, it was like a silent storm, gathering its strength. It wasn't long before the calm was shattered. As dessert was served, Patricia, perhaps emboldened by the wine or simply by the need to assert her dominance, raised her glass. Her voice, carrying the weight of years of family manipulation, broke the strained silence. To family, she said, her eyes gleaming with unspoken meanings, in all its complicated, wonderful forms, especially those who are finding new paths forward. Her glance was deliberate, settling on Vanessa and Theo, the words laced with an unmistakable reference. A few awkward murmurs of agreement rippled around the table, but Adrien remained unmoved, his expression a mask of icy composure as he sipped his drink. Patricia, unable to resist the chance for one more jab, let her words drip with condescension. And speaking of paths forward, she began, eyes flicking toward Adrien, we wish Adrien well as he adjusts to his new circumstances. Sometimes change, while painful, is for the best. The disdain in her tone was palpable. Adrien's fingers tightened around his glass, the words threatening to spill from his mouth. But Patricia wasn't finished. My ex-in-law has many qualities, but perhaps parenthood and partnership weren't among his strengths, she added, her voice dripping with venom. A cold silence fell over the room, but Adrien felt a faint warmth from Mia's hand closing around his, an unspoken pledge of support. He squeezed it, the simple act grounding him. Standing, his movement drew every eye to him, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. Thank you, Patricia, for that enlightening perspective, he said, his voice even and controlled, though it carried clearly through the room. Since we're sharing observations about family, perhaps I might offer one of my own. Vanessa's eyes widened in alarm. Adrien, please, she whispered urgently, but he ignored her, raising his glass again. To honesty, he said, his gaze sweeping over the table, something I've always valued, though apparently not everyone at this table shares that priority. Patricia's smile faltered, her composure starting to crack. Adrien, this isn't the time. On the contrary, he interrupted smoothly, his words slicing through the tension. What better time to clear the air among family? His eyes locked onto Theo Reynolds. For those who prey on family, it's time for the truth to come to light. Theo, unfazed but unmistakably cautious, set down his fork with deliberate care. Careful, Mercer. Your guest here. His voice was a low warning. A guest, Adrien echoed, his words thick with disdain. Unwelcome, I'd say. But then again, the truth is rarely welcome at gatherings built on lies. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some already murmuring their excuses, quietly preparing to leave before the storm broke fully. Mia's voice came, a soft whisper of concern. Dad, maybe not here. But Adrien was resolute. He patted her hand gently. It's all right, Mia. Sometimes things need to be said out loud. Turning back to this table, Adrien's gaze held steady. For those that don't know, my wife has been having an affair with Mr. Reynolds here while simultaneously helping him siphon funds from our company to finance his gambling debts. His words hung in the air, thick with accusation. Gasps and whispers erupted, a wave of shocked disbelief rippling through the gathered company. Vanessa's face drained of color, and before she could protest, Adrien continued, his voice unwavering. But that's old news. What many of you don't know, what Vanessa herself didn't know until recently, is that this isn't a love story. It's a con, one that her own mother helped orchestrate. All eyes swung to Patricia. She rose abruptly, a sharp edge to her voice. That's enough. You're drunk, Adrien. Her eyes darted nervously to the others at the table. It's time for you to leave. I'm perfectly sober, Adrien replied, his tone chillingly calm. And I have the emails to prove it. Shall I read them aloud? The ones where you and Reynolds discuss using Vanessa to get to my company, to the lakefront property you both coveted for development? Patricia's nephew, David, a lawyer, stepped in, his voice low and placating. I think we should take this conversation somewhere private. Why? Adrien's question was almost a sneer. When the plotting was done in secret, shouldn't the truth be public? And then, the moment Adrien had been waiting for arrived, the crack in Patricia's carefully crafted armor. Her composure finally broke, and she snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. He's a terrible father, just like he was a terrible husband. She spat, her words punctuating the room with venom. Everyone knows it. A nervous laugh rippled through some of the guests. They were the ones eager to diffuse the tension, to align with Patricia's camp, or simply to avoid the coming confrontation. But Mia, her cheeks flushed with anger, stood abruptly, her small frame brimming with unshakable resolve. Grandma, she said, her voice clear and unwavering, I have something Mom doesn't want you to know. The words were a thunderclap in the silence, the impact instantaneous and devastating. Vanessa's face turned ashen, her lips parting in disbelief. Mia, no, please, Vanessa whispered, but her daughter was beyond stopping. Last year, when Mom said she was working late all those nights, she was with Mr. Reynolds. I saw them together at the Lakeside Hotel when I was supposed to be at debate practice. She made me promise not to tell Dad. The collective gasp that swept through the room was like a shockwave, leaving silence in its wake. Vanessa swayed in her chair, her eyes wide with horror, and then crumpled. Her body slumping to the floor, she fainted. Chaos erupted, with people rushing to her side, others backing away from the table as the unfolding drama became too much to bear. Through it all, Adrien remained still, a quiet observer to the unraveling spectacle. His plan, years in the making, had come to fruition in ways he could never have orchestrated better himself. But the true triumph, he realized, wasn't in the destruction of those who had wronged him. It was in the look on Theo Reynolds' face, the quick recalculation, the measuring of losses, the realization that Vanessa had become a liability, no longer the asset he had so eagerly courted. Come on, Dad, Mia said softly, tugging at his arm. Let's go. As they made their way toward the door, Adrien couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and hollowness. The exposure had been devastating. Yes, but somehow it didn't taste as sweet as he had imagined. You knew, didn't you? He asked quietly as they reached the car. About your mother and Reynolds. Mia leaned against the door, her youthful face drawn with the weight of the secret she'd kept. All this time, she murmured, her voice carrying the sorrow of a burden far too heavy for her years. Since last September. I wanted to tell you, but Mom said it would destroy you, destroy our family. Adrien's heart ached as he looked at his daughter, the innocent victim of a twisted adult world. It did anyway, he whispered, and then after a long pause he asked, Are you mad at me? Her voice was small, vulnerable. No, sweetheart, never. You were put in an impossible position by the adults who should have protected you. I'm sorry you had to carry that burden. The silence that enveloped them as they drove home was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had just transpired. And as Adrien reflected on the evening's revelations, he realized that while the public humiliation of Vanessa and Patricia had been satisfying, the true cost of all that had happened, of everything he had lost, was far more complex than he had ever imagined. Adrien sat alone in his office, the hum of his computer the only sound in the tense silence. He'd borne the weight of this secret for nearly a year now, an unexpected burden, a festering wound he hadn't anticipated. And yet, it wasn't just his heart that had been pierced by Vanessa's betrayal, but their daughter's as well. It had been a blow to the very fabric of their family, a fracture too deep to mend in a single lifetime. He had no illusions. This would be the cost of his revenge. And yet, as he sat there unshaken, the cold certainty of his resolve filled him. Theo Reynolds, the architect of this destruction, had so far emerged unscathed, perhaps a little embarrassed, his pride bruised, but his public image remained intact. His financial troubles were contained in private circles, his reputation still unchallenged. Adrien's plan, however, was far from complete. The final phase, the reckoning that would tear Reynolds' empire to pieces, was still to come. Adrien's mind sharpened at the thought. Tomorrow at the Monarch Club, Reynolds would learn just how thoroughly Adrien Mercer had dismantled the life he'd built on lies and deceit. The morning after the barbecue was calm, but Adrien could feel the storm brewing. As he watched the opening of the financial markets, his thoughts drifted back to the last year. It wasn't just about money, it was about justice, about ensuring that Reynolds understood, once and for all, that actions had consequences. The inevitable phone call came, Liam's name flashing on his screen, cutting through his thoughts. "It's happening," Liam said, no pleasantries, no preamble. "Reynolds Development Group is in freefall. Stocks down 30% and still dropping." The Hamilton Street news hit the wires an hour ago, and the fallout's been swift. Adrien leaned back, absorbing the news with an eerie calm. He'd planned for this, every detail meticulously orchestrated. The SEC investigation was now a formal reality, and the creditors, those vultures who circled waiting for the scent of failure, were calling in their markers. He could almost hear the panic in their voices. "Is everything proceeding as planned?" Adrien asked, his tone still steady. "Perfectly." Catherine Reynolds gave her statement this morning. She corroborated the fraud allegations. Several other ex-wives and former business partners who were once muzzled by NDAs have come forward. The legal exposure is massive, tens of millions at least. Adrien's lips curled into a faint, grim smile. "Good." There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. "What about Vanessa? She's been trying to reach you, multiple calls, urgent." "I imagine it is," Adrien replied, his voice flat, the weight of their shared history like a shadow between his words. "Has she been named in any of the investigations?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time unless you intervene." "Which is exactly what she's hoping for," Adrien finished for him, his voice cool as ice. "Will you?" "For Maya's sake, if nothing else," Adrien said, his thoughts drifting briefly to their daughter. Mia was the only reason any of this still mattered. He considered it for a moment, then added, "I'll meet her at the lake house at noon. Let's see what she has to say first." The call ended, and Adrien turned to check on Mia. She was still sleeping, the remnants of the night's festivities still visible in the slight disarray of her bedroom. He left a note on the kitchen table for her, explaining where he'd gone, then gathered the necessary documents for his meeting with Vanessa. The lake house was eerily quiet when he arrived, the sunlight dancing lazily across the water, reflecting off the windows that framed the serene view. He had built this house with his own hands, pouring himself into every detail, every beam, every corner. It had been his sanctuary until now, when the thought of Reynolds turning it into a condo development filled him with white-hot fury. Vanessa arrived precisely at noon, her steps measured but hesitant as she crossed the threshold. Her makeup, once perfect, now seemed to sag under the weight of her exhaustion, and the years that had passed since their separation seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. She lingered near the door, uncertain of her welcome in a house she once called home. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, stepping into the living room. Adrien didn't rise. Instead, he sat in the same chair, the one he had occupied for years, gesturing for her to sit opposite him. "You said it was urgent," he said, his voice steady but edged with a quiet intensity. "I assume it's about Reynolds' current legal troubles?" Her composure faltered then, just for a moment before she steeled herself. "You did this," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "All of it. The Hamilton Street project, the SEC investigation, the creditors. It wasn't just revenge, was it? This is systematic destruction." Adrien's expression remained unchanged, his gaze cold as he met her eyes. "Yes," he replied, his voice devoid of apology. "It was." The words hung in the air, heavy with their shared history. Vanessa's face twisted with something close to disbelief. "Why go this far? You had what you wanted, the company, the divorce on your terms. Why? Why destroy everything?" Adrien studied her for a long moment. This woman who had once been the center of his world, whose love he had trusted without question, was now a shadow of the person he had once known. Some betrayals, he realized, couldn't be answered with half measures. "Reynolds didn't just want my company," he said, his voice low and controlled. "He wanted my life, my home, my daughter's respect. He wanted everything. He needed to understand there are consequences for such ambition." Vanessa swallowed hard, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "In me? What consequences do you have planned for me? Adrien's eyes never left hers. That depends, he said, his tone calculating, on what you have to say today. Vanessa inhaled sharply, and for the first time since entering the room, she seemed to falter. The investigators contacted me this morning, she said, her voice raw. They have evidence of my involvement in the financial dealings. They're offering a deal if I testify against Theo, but even with cooperation, I'm facing possible charges unless someone with influence can convince them I was manipulated, that I wasn't a willing participant. She met his gaze then, her eyes desperate. You have that influence, Adrien. You're the whistleblower. You exposed everything. Adrien leaned forward, his gaze intense. Were you manipulated? Or were you a willing participant? Vanessa looked away, her gaze unfocused, as if searching for an answer that might save her. I don't know anymore. At first, seeing Theo again. After all those years, it felt like fate. He was charming, attentive, everything you had stopped being. But then I saw those emails from my mother, saw how deep the manipulation went. By then, I was already compromised. The money transfers, the fake consultancy. I convinced myself it was temporary, that no one would get hurt. Adrien's voice was firm. People always get hurt, Vanessa. That's how con games work. She nodded miserably, as though the weight of her actions was finally sinking in. What happens now? Adrien reached into his briefcase, pulling out a folder and placing it on the coffee table between them. Two options, he said. Behind door number 1, I tell the investigators you were a willing accomplice. You face charges alongside Reynolds and your mother. You'll likely serve time, lose your professional licenses, and most devastating of all, lose any meaningful relationship with Mia, who now knows the full extent of your deception. Vanessa flinched, the weight of his words settling on her like a cold, suffocating blanket. And door number 2? Adrien pushed the folder toward her. You sign these papers. A full confession detailing Reynolds' methods, your mother's involvement, and your own actions. You agree to testify against both of them. In exchange, I'll use my influence to ensure you're treated as a cooperating witness, not a co-conspirator. Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to him, suspicion warring with a desperate, fragile hope. Why would you do that? After everything? Adrien's gaze softened, but just barely. Not for you, he said, his voice steady. For Mia, she's lost enough in this mess. She shouldn't have to visit her mother in prison, too. With trembling hands, Vanessa opened the folder. Adrien's fingers trembled, the confession in his hands a stark reminder of everything he had lost. The paper was cold and meticulous, its words unflinching as they outlined Vanessa's betrayal and her financial crimes with unsettling precision. But it didn't stop there. It painted a portrait of Theo Reynolds, the developer who had wormed his way into their lives, and the role Patricia Powell had played in orchestrating the entire treacherous plot. My mother, Vanessa's voice cracked. Her eyes were brimming with guilt, but there was something else, something darker, lurking in her confession. She knew what he was, what he did to me, and still, she trailed off, unable to speak the truth she had been too blind to see until it was too late. Adrien's gaze never wavered. Some people's need for revenge overshadows everything, even love for their own children, he observed quietly, his voice steady but heavy with the truth he could not ignore. The irony of it was not lost on him. After all, wasn't that the very path he had walked himself? His mind wandered briefly to the chess set he had crafted in his workshop, each piece meticulously carved, a silent testament to how close he had come to becoming the very thing he despised. Vanessa signed the confession with a shaky hand, her signature an approximation of the confidence she once wielded so easily. She handed the folder back to him, their fingers brushing just for a moment, a fleeting ghost of a connection that had long since died. I'm sorry, Adrien, she whispered. Her voice was soft, but it couldn't mask the depth of the betrayal. Not just for the affair, for failing to see the good in front of me. A good man, a good father, someone who built instead of destroyed. Adrien took the folder without a word, the weight of her apology neither lifting nor changing anything. The damage was done, the trust between them shattered beyond repair. What will you do now? Vanessa asked as she turned to leave. her voice barely audible. Rebuild, Adrien replied simply, his tone unwavering. It's what I do. As she left, Adrien stood alone in the silent house, his gaze drifting to the lake that had drawn him here years ago. The water was unnervingly still, reflecting the sky with such perfection that it seemed almost unreal. He thought back to Mia's words from just a few days ago. Remember who you really are. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. It was Catherine Reynolds. It's done, she said, her voice laced with finality. I've given my statement. The investigators say it's the last piece needed for the arrest warrant. Thank you, Catherine, Adrien said sincerely, feeling the gravity of her words. For your courage. It wasn't courage, she corrected him softly. It was the opportunity to finally see justice done. Will you be there when I take him in? Adrien had arranged with Valerie to be notified when the arrest was imminent. Yes, Catherine replied, her voice quiet yet firm. I need to see his face when he realizes it's over. Understand? I do, Adrien murmured. Just don't let it consume you. After it's done, find a way back to building instead of destroying. You're too good at creation to waste it on revenge. Her words were a mirror to his own thoughts, and they chilled him. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'll try. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Adrien received the call from Valerie. It's happening, the Monarch Club. 30 minutes. The exclusive gambling venue had been the site of Reynolds' downfall. It was there that his addiction had first exposed his vulnerability, which Adrien had so expertly exploited. Adrien arrived just as law enforcement was surrounding the building. Officers were stationed at the exits, prepared for the inevitable. Mr. Mercer, the lead investigator, greeted him, his tone respectful. We appreciate your cooperation in this matter. Your evidence was instrumental in building our case. I'm just glad justice is being served, Adrien replied, his eyes fixed on the entrance. You should know, the investigator continued, we're also bringing in Patricia Powell tonight. The conspiracy charges are solid, based on the email evidence and your ex-wife's testimony. Adrien nodded, but the thought of Mia's grandmother in handcuffs brought him no satisfaction. It was just another casualty in a war he never started, but had now ended with surgical precision. When the arrest came, it was anticlimactic. Reynolds emerged from the Monarch Club at 11:17 p.m., speaking animatedly on his phone. He barely had time to process the situation before officers closed in, reciting his rights and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. From across the street, Adrien watched in silence, a ghost in the shadows. When their eyes met, Reynolds' widened with shock, then narrowed in furious recognition. Mercer, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you've lost everything too. Adrien said nothing. He simply held Reynolds' gaze, unblinking, until the officers ushered him into the waiting police vehicle. And only then did Adrien feel the weight lifting from his shoulders. Not a sense of happiness or satisfaction, but the deep, quiet unburdening that comes with completed vengeance. As he drove home, Adrien realized Reynolds was right about one thing. He had lost much in this battle, his marriage, his illusions, perhaps even some part of his soul. But unlike Reynolds, Adrien still had Mia. He still had his company. Most importantly, he still had his ability to create, to build rather than destroy. 3 months later, the lake house was sold for far above market value to a conservation trust that would preserve the land for generations. Adrien used half of the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for students pursuing sustainable architecture. Creation, rising from the ashes of destruction. Theo Reynolds pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, racketeering, and financial crimes. He received a 15-year sentence. Patricia Powell, facing her own charges, suffered a stroke before her trial and was remanded to a medical facility under guard. Vanessa, true to the agreement, testified against both and received probation instead of prison time. On a crisp fall afternoon, Adrien stood in his workshop, gazing at the chess set he had created during the darkest days of his plotting. Each piece represented a player in the tragedy that had consumed his life for months. Himself, Vanessa, Reynolds, Patricia, each figure rendered with the kind of exquisite detail that only anger and betrayal could carve. Dad? Mia's voice came from the doorway. Are you ready? The foundation ceremony starts in an hour. Adrien looked up, smiling as he met her eyes. They had weathered the storm together, and though the pain was still there, it had forged a bond that nothing could break. Mia now spent weekends with Vanessa, a tentative reconciliation that Adrien neither encouraged nor discouraged. Almost, he replied, gathering the chess pieces one by one. Just finishing something first. After Mia left, Adrien placed the set in a custom box he had crafted himself, walnut with maple inlay, a final testament to his skill as a craftsman. He carried the box to the stone fireplace in his new home, a modest yet beautiful place he had designed and built over the summer. Piece by piece, he fed the figures into the flames, Vanessa, Patricia, even Theo. Let them burn. The flames danced hungrily, devouring the last remnants of a game Adrien had long since abandoned. Watching the fire consume the figures, first his queen, then his bishop, he felt a strange sort of detachment, as if each piece represented a part of him that had died along with his past. Finally, it was the king, the final piece that crumbled into the fire, the one he'd carved with meticulous care, the likeness of a man who had once believed in honor, in trust, before the betrayal, before the unraveling. Now it was nothing but smoke and cinders, the last vestiges of vengeance dissolved in the heat, leaving only a hollow echo of anger and unresolved fury. Adrien stood, breath steady, watching the embers glow in the dying light of the day. His heart was no longer clenched in the vice of retribution, but there was no peace either. Revenge had been a comforting weight, a purpose. Now it was gone, and in its place a gaping void, a silence that screamed of what was lost. Forgiveness, he knew, was an impossibility. Trust had been shattered beyond repair. There would be no absolution, no redemption, not for the ones who had turned their backs on him, not for Vanessa, not for Theo, not for any of them. Yet, as the final ashes settled into the earth, something else stirred within him, something quieter but undeniably present. He had built things before, homes, structures, dreams, but now the idea of rebuilding felt different. The rage would always linger, an ever-present shadow. But perhaps it was time to let the fire of vengeance burn out, to step away from the wreckage and look towards something that could be constructed without hatred, without bitterness. "Dad," Mia's voice called from outside, a soft tug on his soul. "We should go." Her voice was like the first ray of light after a storm, pulling him from the weight of the past. Adrien turned, blinking against the fading light, and stepped away from the fire. He could feel the cool autumn air brushing against his skin, a reminder that there was still life beyond the ruins. He walked toward the sound of her voice, toward the future, toward a path unmarked by betrayal but forged in the aftermath of it. He didn't know what that future would look like, but the last embers of his past, of his anger, of his quest for revenge, burned out with the smoke. He was free in a way, though the chains of his history would never truly loosen. He glanced over at Mia, standing there in the threshold of the old world in the new, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. Not the kind of hope that filled his heart with promises of complete healing. No, that would never come. But the kind of hope that whispered of possibility, of something that could be built from the ruins. He didn't know what it would be yet, but it would be something worth creating. The unforgiving man remained unforgiving, but the man who had been consumed by revenge was no more. In that moment, Adrien knew he would no longer be defined by what he refused to forgive. Instead, he would be defined by what he chose to build from the ashes of betrayal. "Coming," he answered, stepping into the crisp air, leaving the fire in the pot behind. As he joined Mia, the weight of the years, of the anger, slowly shifted. Perhaps it was time for something new after all. And as the evening sky began to deepen, Adrien didn't look back.